If you've ever set a boundary and you immediately felt guilty, you're not alone. Maybe you finally said no. Maybe you stopped apologizing for needing space. Maybe you chose yourself for the first time. But instead of feeling relieved in any of this, you felt selfish. Healthy boundaries don't usually feel wrong because they're wrong. They might feel wrong at first because they're unfamiliar. If guilt keeps making your decisions, you're going to spend your life protecting everyone else's comfort while quietly abandoning your own needs. Over time, resentment is going to replace generosity, and exhaustion is going to replace compassion. And the relationships that you have that you're trying so hard to protect are going to begin to suffer anyway. So today we're going to talk about why boundaries create so much guilt and what your nervous system has to do with it, and how you can start setting boundaries without believing that you're hurting the people you love. So I worked with someone recently and they spent an entire weekend feeling terrible. This woman, she told her sister she couldn't help her move. And she hadn't been rude about it. She hadn't been selfish. She just simply had other commitments. And she needed to say that. She needed to say no. But after the conversation ended, she could not stop replaying it in her mind. And she wondered if she had disappointed her sister and if she was wrong. She worried she had damaged the relationship. She even thought about calling back to apologize and to change her entire commitments and plans. When we explored where all that guilt was coming from, though, something became very clear. She wasn't reacting to the boundary that she had just set. She was reacting to a lifetime of believing that being loved meant being available. And for years, she had confused being needed with being valued, and those are not the same things. So when she finally chose to honor one of her own needs, her nervous system interpreted it as a threat to the relationship. And that's when she realized something that really changed everything for her. The problem wasn't the boundary. It was the story she had learned to believe about what boundaries meant. I'm Jenn Pinkerton, and I'm a psychotherapist and a connection expert. And I help individuals and couples, and I help them stop protecting or repeating these painful relationship patterns by understanding their nervous system and creating this much needed emotional safety to build healthier, more connected relationships where they can truly thrive. So one of the questions I hear all the time is, why do I feel so guilty setting these boundaries when I know I need to do it? But if you've ever struggled to say no, or you've worried about the impact of disappointing someone, especially someone you love, or you find yourself putting everybody's needs ahead of your own, then this video is probably for you. Today, I'm going to explain where that guilt comes from and why it has so much to do with your own nervous system and your attachment history, and how you can begin setting healthy boundaries without believing you're hurting the people that you love. Guilt doesn't always mean you're doing something wrong. So one of the biggest misconceptions about guilt is that it always means that you've made the wrong decision. You've made a mistake. But it doesn't. Sometimes guilt is an important signal that we've acted outside of our values and that we need to make things right. But sometimes guilt can also simply mean you're doing something very different and unfamiliar than you've ever done before. So think about someone who spent years saying yes when they really wanted to say no. Think about someone who years has put everybody else's needs before their own. Years of believing that being a good partner, good parent, good friend, good daughter always meant being available, being ready to earn love. And the first time they set a healthy boundary, of course, it's going to feel uncomfortable. Their nervous system has never even experienced that as normal. So one question I ask clients is this: are you feeling guilty because you've done something wrong, or because someone else is uncomfortable with your boundary? Those are two very different things. Explore that a little bit. Because healthy boundaries, they don't guarantee that everyone's going to be happy. Everyone's going to be thrilled with you and your decisions. Sometimes you're going to disappoint people. Sometimes boundaries change expectations. Sometimes they require other people to adjust, but that doesn't automatically make them unhealthy or wrong. In fact, one of the healthiest shifts you can make is learning that someone else's disappointment is not always evidence that you've done something wrong. Sometimes it's simply evidence that you are no longer abandoning yourself to keep everybody else comfortable. Feeling guilty doesn't automatically mean that you've done something wrong. Sometimes it just means you're finally doing something healthier than you've ever done before. So if this is resonating with you, and this sounds a little familiar, it might be a sign that your relationship with boundaries, emotional safety, or people-pleasing deserves a much closer look. That's exactly why I created the Pinkerton Relational Health Index, or the PRHI. It is a free assessment tool, and it's designed to help you better understand how you're showing up, understanding your relationship patterns, including emotional safety, communication, conflict, connection, boundaries, trust, and intimacy. Awareness is always the first step towards change, so you can download it using the link below. Your nervous system learned that boundaries were risky. Children are incredibly adaptive. We learn very early what helps us stay connected to the very people that we depend on for everything. And maybe you learned that keeping the peace was safer than speaking up. Maybe you learned that expressing your needs led to criticism or conflict or rejection or some sort of negative consequence. Maybe love felt conditional for you. You were praised maybe for being easy or the good child or helpful, responsible. So your nervous system learned something that made perfect sense at the time. If I disappoint people, I might lose connection. That belief doesn't automatically disappear when we become adults. It actually follows us into our friendships and our marriages, our families, our workplaces. All of our wounds do. So every time you consider setting a boundary, your nervous system isn't just thinking about today's conversation for the boundary. It's going to react to years of learning that saying no could cost you big, cost you love, acceptance, or belonging. And that's why boundaries can feel so emotionally uncomfortable. Your body's responding as if the relationship itself is at risk. But here's what I want you to remember. Healthy relationships are strong enough to tolerate healthy boundaries. In fact, boundaries don't damage healthy relationships at all. They make them healthier. Because relationships built on obligation eventually create resentment. Relationships built on honesty create trust. So the next time guilt shows up for you, instead of asking, how do I get rid of this feeling? I want you to try asking, what is my nervous system afraid might happen if I honor my own needs? And that question moves you from self-judgment to self-understanding. And self-understanding is where healing begins. Your guilt isn't always telling you that you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it's your nervous system reacting to an old fear that no longer has to run your life. People-pleasing isn't the same thing as kindness. And one of the hardest truths about boundaries is realizing that not every act of generosity comes from a healthy place. Sometimes we help because we genuinely want to. We care and it makes us feel good to do that. And sometimes we help instead because we're afraid of what might happen if we don't. Those two things may look the same on the outside, but they feel very different on the inside. And healthy generosity feels like a choice you're making willingly. People-pleasing feels like an obligation. Healthy generosity leaves you feeling fulfilled and happy. People-pleasing often leaves you feeling drained and resentful or overwhelmed. So one of the questions I encourage my clients to ask themselves is, if I knew this person wouldn't be upset with me, would I still say yes? That's an incredibly revealing question. Because if the answer is no, then your decision may not be coming from love. It may be coming from fear of disappointing someone, fear of conflict, fear of rejection, fear of being seen as selfish, or maybe just a wound in general. And the healthiest relationships aren't built on one person constantly sacrificing themselves for everyone else. They're built on two people who can care deeply about each other without expecting one another to ignore their own needs. The goal isn't to stop being kind. The goal is to make sure your kindness is freely given, not fearfully given, because love offered freely creates connection. Love offered out of fear often creates resentment. So if saying yes to everyone else always requires saying no to yourself, that's not kindness at all. That is self-abandonment. Healthy boundaries don't push good people away. So one of the greatest fears people have about setting boundaries is this: what if they get upset? And the honest answer is, they might. Not everyone is going to like your boundaries. Not everyone is going to agree with them. And not everyone is going to understand them at all. But somebody else's reaction just doesn't automatically determine whether your boundary was healthy. Healthy relationships make room for honesty. They make room for differences. They make room for each person's needs to matter. And a healthy boundary isn't about controlling somebody else's behavior. It's about communicating what you need to protect your emotional, your physical, and your relational well-being. So here's something I want you to remember. People who love you may need time to adjust to a new boundary. That doesn't mean that the relationship is failing. It means the relationship is changing, and that's okay. Healthy people adapt. Healthy relationships grow through honest conversations. Healthy love doesn't require one person to disappear so the other person can be comfortable. It allows both people to matter. So if you spent years saying yes when you meant no, your boundaries may surprise the very people around you, and that is okay. You're not responsible for making everyone else feel good. You're not responsible for making every difficult emotion disappear. You're responsible for communicating with honesty, kindness, and respect. And the people who truly care about you may not love every boundary that you set. But over time, they'll learn that your boundaries aren't pushing them away. They're helping you show up with less resentment, more authenticity, and greater emotional availability. Because boundaries don't keep love out. They actually protect the space where healthy love can grow. The strongest relationships aren't built by people who never disappoint each other. They're built by people who can be honest about their needs without making honesty a threat to the relationship. Boundaries aren't about keeping people out. They're about making sure you don't keep leaving yourself behind. And every healthy boundary is an act of honesty. It says, this is what I need to stay connected to myself and to this relationship. The goal isn't to become less caring. It's to stop believing that love requires self-sacrifice. Because the healthiest relationships aren't built by one person carrying everyone else's needs. They're built when two people feel safe enough to honor both their own needs and each other's. Healthy boundaries are not going to destroy connection. They instead make genuine connection possible. A big myth about relationships is that love alone is enough to make them last. It isn't. In the next video, I'm going to share the 4 relationship habits that help love grow instead of slowly drift apart. And we'll talk about the daily behaviors that create emotional safety, deepen intimacy, strengthen trust, and help relationships thrive over time. Because great relationships don't happen by accident. They're built one intentional habit at a time. So click on this next video, and I'll see you there.